I believe this is the element that Kubrick was most exposed to in terms of the elite. This idea that there will be a technological aspect to re-triggering a new golden age, that mankind will find a form of immortality through technology, and its synthesis with that technology. And of course, we've had the whole themes in science fiction from the Terminator films, the whole cybernetic, cyborg type idea, that a human is somehow made better physically through the introduction of technology into its biological makeup. And of course, the next step to that is ultimately nanotechnology, and the injecting of genetically specified nanotechnology. And it is my belief that in very, very deep, the very deep recesses of where work is being looked at, that there is a desperate attempt at trying to formulate through technology the next evolutionary step for humanity. My personal thoughts on that, from what I have come to understand about the relationship between energy, motion, and what we call the physical realm, I believe that they're destined to fail, dramatically so. I think they'll stumble around trying to find that spark that we call life, and they will never get it. They will only ever be, they'll never be better than a Frankenstein vampire type situation. They'll have to constantly recruit from an existing life force in order to feed their ideas, and all they'll end up with is sterile examples of a model of what they think is a better human, but a human that will simply be unable to perpetuate itself as a species.
Do you think that the reason why they'll never get it is because that one of the key factors in getting higher aspects of reality is being connected with nature? Because if you look at this paradigm, well, at least where I'm sitting, in New York, I live in a concrete city. They've completely separated the biological human being from its natural element. We walk in shoes on concrete. We have all of this electromagnetic junk, airwaves, if you will. We're constantly being bombarded, our biological system. We can't commune with nature. And, the ancients, the Dogon, the Aztecs, the Yoruba, the Celtics, the Gaelics, I mean, you name it, they were communing on the Internet before we even knew what the Internet was. I mean, for God's sake, how is it that the Dogon knew what Sirius A and B was, How is it that the Aboriginal people in New Zealand knew that Saturn even had, rings around it? You know what I'm saying? So do you believe that that's why they'll never get it?
Absolutely. That's exactly the reason. What you see, it comes back to, I get asked this question a lot. Do these illuminated ones, or people who are in the Saturn death cult, the ones who have elevated themselves to elite status, whether they're the nobility class or the nouveau riche types, the banking community who indulge in occult ritual and so on, do they know this cosmos? And the answer is no, they don't. And it is precisely for the reason that they themselves are ignorant of what mythology was actually telling us on a natural level, that they lost contact with nature. If I can emphasize it again, that mythology is really the record of natural events, but because of the nature of personifying these natural events, it's come down to us as a sort of a weird collection of almost psychedelic dreamscapes and bizarre happenings that make no sense to us in our modern world. And it's this modern world that we live in that the elite are as much captured, because basically they've financed it or promoted it. But this idea that in the cosmos as we know it, the solar system, the planets that we live in, you've got this very dead idea of what formed this this whole cosmos. You have the idea of the sun just simply being a controlled nuclear explosion that keeps going on. The Earth and rocky planets are just rocks, gas giants out in the solar system, and all of it is just held together through mass and gravity. And so subsequently, what that tells people is that the energy for life seems to come from within, within the sun, within planets and such. And so that completely negates the idea that everything is interconnected, that everything is actually feeding off and feeding each other at the same time, that there is a positive, negative flow between objects, between forces, between packets of energy that can be described as feminine, masculine, or yin and yang, to use the Far Eastern sort of idea. And as a result of that, these people have they keep thinking that life is little packets of I find it almost impossible to describe their idea, but it's sort of like somehow spontaneously just exists in itself, and that's what they're looking for. They don't understand that every life is connected and sustained by every other life, and I mean that as in the whole of the cosmos. It's not just human to human and so on. It's very much this idea that the cosmos itself is a living entity, and that we come back to sort of your idea. I couldn't help noticing on your Skype thing, you say something. I'm a conduit for the creative force, something like that, dear. What?
Yeah.
Can you help me? What is it that you say?
You're like, can you help me out here? I'm a conduit for humanity and basically for the universe.
Right. Well, this, it's sort of, to me, is an intuitive understanding that energy flows from without to within, but also from within to out. And so everything is ultimately connected, in that way. These clowns are basically trying to find the next evolutionary step by looking at the human in isolation. It's doomed to failure, and yes, it's completely understandable that their systems, whether it's financial control systems, and even the cities, as you described, New York, when I lived in Hong Kong, the same sort of diff. You're locked up in these little cubicles, isolated. It's so different to how it used to once be for humanity. Just even the construct of the family, where they've broken it down to the nuclear and now to the solo parents and so on like that. Once upon a time, families were extended, and that was just a very natural thing. The wisdom from great-grandparents were fed down through to the great-grandchildren, and the energy from the great-grandchildren were fed all the way back up the line. And it was a totally different view of life.
It was, and that's why, Troy, I fight for the traditional way of being of the indigenous earthbound, because I understand. Right. When I heard, because I love looking at the planets and the stars since I was a little girl, and I always knew that I was a part of something bigger than myself. And when I became an adult, I really knew, because I had an experience of one day looking at the cosmos and having this overwhelming feeling of joy in being connected that is undescribable by the human language. It felt so expansive, right. And then I understood for real what I was a part of. And this is why I fight for the essence of family. I fight for the essence of us going within, going without, as above, so below, and becoming a part of that, because our signatures are being completely discombobulated by what's going on in the planet. And I almost feel like, Troy, that this is one big experiment. Like, for real, like there's some beings out there that are bigger than us looking down in a glass box, and they're like laughing. They're like having a cup of tea with all of these other beings, and they're like, well, look at this group over here. They're fighting about this, that. I mean, that's what it really feels like. It's like in the Matrix.
Sure.
When Morpheus says to Neo, you know that something's wrong. You can't really put your finger on it, but you smell it when you pay your taxes, when you're at
sure.
work, and all of these things. Like, I feel like we're in one big, huge experiment.
Yes, most definitely. I think a lot of people do, come to that conclusion. My own mother has often expressed very similar feelings about things. I myself, slightly different sort of feelings, but just generally speaking, the idea I have always been and always will be seems to be an innate understanding for most people.
And on a metaphysical note, I find it very interesting, this number 7. And why do I find it interesting? As one does research, you go more deeper down into the rabbit hole of Saturn. I find it interesting that Saturn has 7 rings, and that when you look at the certain biblical texts, you have the 7 churches, the 7 seals, you have the 7 chakras. What the heck is it about these rings, Troy? And the aspect, what's even deeper, is I'm going to make a water connection. There's the water connection of the rings of Saturn. Planet Earth is filled with water. We are filled with water. What's going down? What's the jig?
Right. Yes. This is where the cosmology that has been unearthed by people involved in Saturn theory, the electric universe, is playing such an important part for my own sort of understanding, even at a metaphysical level, of where we come from, what has happened, what is the importance of certain numbers. I'm not a big numerologist myself, but in terms of number 7, from a biblical point of view, I know that it basically signifies completion, and that it's intricately linked to the 7 days of creation, as it's called, in which in Saturn Death Cult, I link that to the moment that the planet, or the sub-brown dwarf star Saturn, flared nova-like on coming into electrical contact with the current sun. And as a result of that, there was a massive expulsion of material from out of that sub-brown dwarf star that formed into rings. And that most of that material was water, which formed into crystals, which formed the rings, and which were viewed by the inhabitants of the Earth to undergo basically a 7-stage development, and subsequently the 7 days of creation. I have to stress here that my own interpretation of the biblical account in Genesis is that we're not talking about the creation of Earth per se, or the planet. We're talking really about the beginning of time as we know it, or the beginning of being able to tell time. In other words, the beginning of civilization. And this seems to be how it was portrayed in these later writings that are attributed to Moses. The 7 days of creation are linked to the 7 rings of Saturn. So subsequently, 7 plays a part in terms of understanding completion. The number 8, which follows the number 7, is the number for perfection. So you have that link that after 7 comes number 8, perfection. And of course, in the geometry of the Bible, the name Jesus Christ adds up to a 888, 3 eights in a row. And there's very fascinating coded references. I'm not an expert in these areas, but the significance of 7 is definitely linked into the creative epoch, relating back to Saturn and the beginning of what I call the Golden Age.
It would be interesting to if someone would, I guess, examine, you just said Jesus Christ equals 8, and it's also an infinity sign.
Triple A.